The earliest Greek tales about Medusa's origin reach back to the very forces that shaped the ancient Mediterranean world. Stories rooted in genealogies older than the Olympian order itself. According to Hesiod's Theogony, written in the 8th century BC, Medusa was born from a lineage of sea deities beings whose dominion stretched across the hidden depths and restless waters surrounding the Greek chaos world. Her parents were Phorcys and Ceto, primordial figures whose very names evoke the raw, untamed power of the ocean. Phorcys, the old man of the sea, embodied the pre-Olympian powers that ruled the maritime realm. His dominion lay not only upon the bright surface known to sailors, but within the abyss where no light could reach, and strange creatures drifted beyond human thought. Ancient poets described him with hair like grey seaweed, his beard flowing as if alive, his form shifting between man and marine. Ceto, her name drawn from the Greek for sea monster, personified the perilous, unpredictable side of the deep. She was seen both as goddess and creature, the living echo of every fear sailors felt when their ships crossed into uncharted waters. From their union came a lineage unlike any other, a brood of beings that captured both terror and wonder. Among their children were the three grey sisters sharing one eye and one tooth, and the dragon Ladon, guardian of the golden apples of the Hesperides. But most important to our story, the three Gorgon sisters, Stheno, Euryale, and Medusa. This genealogy places the Gorgons within the chthonic order beings tied to the earth, the underworld, and those primordial powers that existed long before civilization took form. Athena, her name, meaning strong or forceful, was eldest among them. She was fierce, violent, relentless, said to have slain more mortals than either of her sisters. Her immortality, shared with Euryale, set her apart from Medusa and fixed her forever within the cosmic balance. Euryale, wide-leaping one, was famed for her piercing cries, echoing across immense distances. Voices so sharp, it was said, could crack stone, could drive men mad. Like Stheno, she was immortal, a timeless embodiment of ancient dread. Medusa, youngest immortal, held a singular place in this trinity. Her name, derived from Medine, to protect or to rule, hinted at complexity beyond the monstrous. Early sources did not call her evil. They spoke instead of a protective power, a being whose terrifying visage served not to destroy but to defend. This protective role became essential to how early Greek religion understood the Gorgons. Their image extended far beyond myth. Archaeological finds from the 7th and 6th centuries BC show Gorgon symbols carved and painted everywhere, apotropaic emblems meant to repel evil. That distinctive Gorgon face surround, wide-eyed, tongue protruding, hair alive with serpents, fangs exposed, appeared on temples, shields, coins, and household goods throughout the Greek world. Its purpose was rooted in sympathetic magic, the belief that what is terrifying to look upon can frighten away greater terrors. The Gorgon's image became a ward, a mirror that turned evil back upon itself. This explains why her likeness adorned armor and weaponry. Warriors carried Medusa's face into battle not only to unnerve their foes, but to invoke divine protection. Archaeological excavations reveal countless such examples, proving the cultural power this imagery once held. The Temple of Artemis at Corfu, built around 590 to 580 BC, bears one of the grandest depictions ever found. On its western pediment, a colossal limestone Gorgon over 9 feet tall stands flanked by panthers and lesser mythic forms. Its sheer scale and prominence show how central the Gorgon motif was to sacred architecture. Pottery from the same era adds more clues. 6th century black figure vases depict Gorgons in many scenes, from Perseus's perilous quest to simple apotropaic emblems on wine cups and jars. Across regions and artisans, the imagery remains strikingly consistent, proof of a shared understanding of what the Gorgon meant. This standardization across the Greek world reveals how deeply the myth had taken root. Coins from Athens, Neapolis, and Paphos bore the Gorgon's head as civic symbol and talisman alike. In currency, faith and trade met myth became part of daily life. Temple decorations of the Archaic age also show theological nuance. Placed above doorways or etched upon sacred vessels, The Gorgon served as guardian of holy space, a sentinel keeping corruption and hostility at bay. This mirrored the broader Greek idea of the sacred, that holiness must be protected, maintained against the creeping forces of decay. Over the 7th and 6th centuries BC, the Gorgon's image evolved. Early renditions exaggerated the monstrous eyes wide, fangs bared, almost animal. But as Greek art grew subtler, the Gorgon's face softened, becoming more human without losing its ancient power to repel. Regional styles reflected local faiths. Etruscan interpretations, for instance, highlighted different facets of the myth while preserving its essential purpose, protection. Even in domestic life, the Gorgon's presence lingered. Mirrors, lamps, and vessels bore her likeness, symbols meant to guard homes and families from unseen harm. And in death, too, she watched. Funerary artifacts, tomb carvings, burial goods often displayed Gorgon motifs as if her power might continue beyond mortal existence. Such continuity revealed a profound belief that divine protection, once invoked, did not end with life itself. The divine nature of the three Gorgon sisters reveals distinctions that shaped their roles within both mythology and worship. Stheno and Euryale were immortal, eternal presences among the primal powers of creation. Medusa alone was mortal, and that fragility would define her legend. This difference in divine status echoed a deeper theological truth, the contrast between forces that endure forever and those that can be confronted, challenged, even destroyed. Stheno, her name, born of the Greek word for strength, embodied relentless, unchanging power. Ancient texts describe her as insatiable, a destroyer whose fury never waned, whose violence endured through the ages. Her immortality made that power constant, a symbol of terror that humanity could never escape. Her presence reminded mortals that chaos is not something that can be erased, only contained, never conquered. Euryale, the wide-leaping sister, was set apart by her astonishing reach and sound. Legend said she could leap across vast lands in a single bound, a pursuer impossible to outrun. Her voice, too, was a weapon so sharp, so unnatural, that stone itself could splinter beneath its cry. Through her, divine terror found another form, not sight, but sound. She expanded the very idea of what it meant to wield power beyond mortal comprehension. Together, Stheno and Euryale stood outside time, untouched by the cycles of life and death. They belonged to a realm where decay did not exist, where power simply was. Their eternal presence anchored the mythic world, balancing the civilized order of the Olympians against the wild unknown beyond their reach. They defined the border between what humans could inhabit and what must remain forbidden. The Medusa's mortality introduced an imbalance, and it was this fracture that gave her story its enduring power. Because she could die, she could also be overcome. She became a test, a challenge meant for heroes. Her mortality did not weaken her. It focused her essence, made her both more dangerous and more symbolic than her immortal kin. She was not an eternal threat, but a specific one, a point where courage and divine will would collide. Ancient accounts offer vivid portraits of the Gorgon sisters' appearance, images designed to inspire awe and dread alike. Their bodies fused human and beast, a deliberate violation of natural order. Bronze hands in place of flesh, capable of tearing through armor and stone. When they moved, their metal limbs rang out a sound of approaching doom. From their shoulders, golden wings spread wide, granting flight, lifting them beyond earthly bounds. But these were no soft, feathered wings. They glinted like beaten metal, their surfaces catching light in fractured reflections, like the wings of monstrous insects. The gleam of gold disoriented the eye, a shimmer that made it hard to tell where they truly were in the air. And as they flew, their wings emitted a low, humming resonance, a sound both beautiful and unnerving, growing louder as death drew near. Their faces bore tusks, great, curving, boar-like teeth that jutted from their mouths and marked them as predators. These tusks grew endlessly, needing constant sharpening against stone to maintain their lethal edge. Writers describe them as strong enough to pierce bronze and crush bone, leaving no hope for anyone who faced them up close. The tusks were not only weapons but tools of survival, allowing them to feed on prey no human mouth could consume. Yet nothing defined them more than their hair, Each strand was alive, a serpent twisting, coiling, breathing. Their heads were a living crown of snakes, writhing and striking in restless motion. The serpents differed in kind. Vipers, cobras, grey constrictors intertwined and watchful. They hissed and shifted ceaselessly, sensing warmth, movement, fear. There were eyes within eyes, a second awareness always alert. No one could approach undetected. Even before the sisters saw, the serpents knew. And they were weapons too, delivering venomous strikes before the gaze itself could petrify. Ancient geographers placed the Gorgon's dwelling in the farthest west beyond the Pillars of Heracles, at the edge of the world known to mortals. It was a place between realms where the civilized sea of Greece met the shadow of the unknown. There, at the world's border, the Gorgons guarded the threshold between order and chaos, between what was human and what was forever beyond it. Near their domain lay the land of the Hesperides, a region crowded with guardians of myth, where day itself faded into dream and every horizon marked the end of the human world. The Hesperides daughters of Atlas tended the orchard of golden apples, fruit said to grant immortality. Beside them coiled the dragon Ladon, another child of Phorcys and Seta, the eternal guardian of their sacred grove. This gathering of divine protectors in the far west of the world formed a living barrier, a sacred threshold preventing mortals from seizing treasures and wisdom that could disturb the cosmic balance. Early Greek geography imagined these western lands as regions no sailor could reach without divine aid or heroic destiny. Beyond the known horizon lay danger. The Pillars of Heracles marked the last frontier. To cross them was to enter waters haunted by monsters and forces that could swallow ships whole. Thus the placement of the Gorgon sisters in those remote territories emphasized their purpose as final sentinels, their very existence defining the limits of the human world. Their dwelling was said to be barren, a desolate realm of stone and silence. There, scattered across the land, stood countless statues, men and beasts alike, frozen in lifelike terror. Each was once alive, each a warning, a memorial to those who had challenged the Gorgons and failed. The plainer stone around their home was a gallery of caution, a monument to the futility of defiance. But the sisters were not merely monsters. Their myth carried deeper meaning. They were guardians of boundaries, keepers of sacred space. They enforced the separation between divine and mortal realms, a barrier that could be crossed only under divine sanction. Their frightening beauty, their lethal gifts, made them perfect instruments of cosmic order. They stood watch where no mortal had the right to walk, protecting divine secrets, hidden knowledge, and power too great to wield. In this way, the Gorgons embodied a crucial principle of Greek religion that certain spaces, certain truths, must remain sealed. Crossing those lines brought pollution miasma, a corruption that stained both trespasser and sanctuary alike. Only supernatural wardens could guard against such danger. The Gorgons' petrifying gaze was not merely destruction, it was purification. By turning violators to stone, they cleansed the sacred ground itself, restoring balance through stillness. The later myth of Medusa's transformation added a tragic depth to this theology. Her change from mortal beauty to serpent-haired terror became one of antiquity's most debated tales, told and retold for centuries by Greek and Roman poets alike. This evolving legend revealed shifts in faith, morality, and perception, how cultures redefined divine justice, sexual violence, and the fragile boundary between gods and humankind. The earliest Greek accounts differ greatly from the Roman story we now recall. In Archaic Greece, poets such as Pindar and the early commentators described Medusa's form as innate, not cursed, not transformed. Her monstrous beauty was part of her divine essence, no more unnatural than the terror of the sea itself. Like other chthonic deities, she was simply born that way, a being whose terrible visage reflected her cosmic function. Archaeological evidence supports this older view. 7th and 6th century art shows Medusa already monstrous serpents for hair, bronze hands, the full Gorgon face without any sign of human origin. To those early artists, there was no before. The horror was eternal. Her visage was not punishment, but nature itself. It was only in the classical period, the 5th and 4th centuries BC, that transformation entered the tale. Writers such as Apollodorus and tragedians of the age suggested that Medusa changed through divine displeasure. Yet even then, the cause was not lust or assault, but arrogance hubris met with divine reprisal. It was the Roman poet Ovid, in his Metamorphoses, who reshaped the myth forever. Writing in the 1st century AD, he wove the story into a reflection of Roman law and power, casting Medusa not as villain or warning, but as victim. In Ovid's telling, Medusa was a priestess of Athena, bound by sacred vows of chastity. Her beauty caught the eye of Poseidon, who pursued her ruthlessly. She resisted, but within Athena's temple, there was no escape. Ovid describes the assault Poseidon's violation within the holiest of sanctuaries, an act that defiled not only Medusa, but the temple itself, the symbol of divine purity. In Roman eyes, such an act shattered every boundary sexual, moral, sacred. But divine hierarchy held its own injustice. Athena could not punish Poseidon, her uncle, a god equal in rank. And so, the punishment fell upon Medusa. Athena transformed her from priestess to monster, from beauty to curse. Her face became unendurable, her gaze fatal. This transformation served multiple ends. It erased the shame of violation, sealed it in silence. And it forged a new protector, a creature whose sight alone could guard temples from further desecration. Yet beneath this divine logic lay unease. Why punish the victim and not the offender? The paradox mirrored the very flaws of ancient justice systems where power, not morality, defined righteousness. In Roman society, law viewed rape as a crime not against the woman, but against property and honor. The burden of purity fell upon the victim herself. Through that lens, Ovid's Medusa was not shielded, she was blamed. Athena's reaction thus became a mirror of divine hierarchy where even gods were bound by rank and restraint. Unable to strike Poseidon, Athena turned her wrath upon the only one she could touch. Some ancient writers, however, offered a softer reading that Athena's act was not cruelty, but grim mercy. By giving Medusa her monstrous form, she made her untouchable safe at last from mortal and divine violation alike. A protection disguised as punishment. A shield that came at the cost of solitude and the terror of all who beheld her. The evolution of Medusa's myth from the archaic to the classical, and finally to the Roman age, mirrors the deep transformation of cultural attitudes towards sexuality, divine power, and moral accountability. In early Greece, Medusa was not a punishment, she was principle. Her terrifying beauty, her monstrous form, these were natural, necessary forces that held the world in balance. The Gorgons were not villains, they were guardians, beings whose dread kept chaos at bay, protecting the fragile lines between sacred and profane. Later, in the classical period, new themes took shape: divine justice, moral consequence. The myths began to question guilt, fairness, the cruelty of punishment itself. Writers lingered on tragedy, on the paradox of gods who protect order by breaking it. For the first time, audiences could sense injustice, the unease of seeing victims condemned while their oppressors stood untouched. Roman storytellers, above all Ovid, pushed the myth still further. They named the violence. They placed the crime in daylight, but in doing so, they also mirrored their own world, where purity was demanded and blame was easily reassigned. Ovid's Rome viewed sexual transgression through law, not empathy. His verses sympathized with Medusa, yet beneath that sympathy lay acceptance, the sense that punishment, somehow, was inevitable. The outrage in Athena's temple, Poseidon's assault, became more than a personal story. It questioned the gods themselves, their morality, their restraint, their right to rule. Poseidon had shattered sacred law, family bond, and divine protocol all at once. To violate a temple, to defile the sanctum of another god, was to threaten the order that held heaven and earth together. Temples were sanctuaries, places where even enemies might find peace. To desecrate one was unthinkable, yet Poseidon did. Ancient authors wrestled with the dilemma: how could a god be punished? How could justice exist among the immortals? Poseidon was Athena's elder, her uncle. Blood and hierarchy bound her hand. In Greek thought, family loyalty outweighed even righteousness. A niece could not strike at her uncle, no matter how grave his offense. Thus, divine retribution turned sideways from the guilty to the innocent, from the god to the mortal woman who could not resist him. And so Medusa bore the sentence meant for another. Roman thinkers added their own layers: law and politics, control and silence. Under Augustus, art could not challenge authority. Ovid himself was exiled for daring too much. Writers learned to question the powerful only through myth, through veiled gods and tragic fates. Athena's decision to transform the priestess, not the aggressor, thus became both theology and commentary. Her act defined the mechanism of divine justice. When equals cannot be judged, punishment finds the powerless. As goddess of wisdom and law, Athena's judgment set a precedent, a model for how divine conflicts were to be resolved when authority collided with moral truth. In turning Medusa's face into terror, Athena created a warning, a living emblem of what follows when sacred space is violated. Medusa became the boundary itself, guardian and warning combined. Her new form was apotropaic, protective, purifying, but it cost her everything human. She gained divine function only by losing her place among the living. In this paradox, the ancients saw meaning, that suffering could yield power, that victimhood itself might birth sanctity. The gods did not operate by human law. Justice was not symmetry, but balance, sometimes restored through punishment, sometimes through transformation. Modern readers recoil, but to the ancients, this was the logic of the cosmos, a world where even tragedy served the order of things, and at the center of it all, the Gorgon's gaze. Of all divine weapons, none matched its terror. Ancient poets across centuries described it, not just its effect, but its philosophy. In the Iliad, Homer names it first, the head of the Gorgon, upon Athena's Aegis, a vision that routed armies, not through death, but through dread. Fear itself became the weapon, a paralysis of the soul. Later hymns elaborated on this mystery. The gaze was not mere sight, it was contact, instant and irreversible. No wall, no armor, no spell could block it. The moment one met her eyes, motion ceased. Breath stopped, life froze. Hesiod gave its scope a power universal, not selective. All living things, bird, beast, or man, could be seized by it. Birds turned to sculpture in mid-flight, fish sank as stone to the ocean floor. A single glance was enough to silence the pulse of the world. This was not vengeance, it was nature. The Gorgon's power was as inevitable as gravity, as sleep, as death. She was not executioner, but element. In later centuries, poets like Pindar and Aeschylus sought meaning in this force, seeing not cruelty, but transformation. The gaze, they wrote, was a divine emanation, an exchange of being itself. The vital spark turned to stillness, the breath of life condensed into mineral. Form remained perfect, unbroken, but the soul was gone. Beauty without animation. And yet, before the stillness, a moment of terror. Aeschylus gave that moment weight, the instant when consciousness recognizes its end. That breath before eternity. The fragment attributed to Aeschylus adds a final cruelty to the Gorgon's legend. It suggests that, in those last moments before stone claimed the body, the victim remained aware, fully conscious, watching life turn cold beneath the skin, powerless to stop it. The transformation was not instant death, but a dreadful pause, a merging of terror and realization, a punishment of the mind as much as the flesh. This moment of awareness gave the Gorgon's gaze new depth, no longer a simple weapon, but a divine sentence carried out through both agony and comprehension. Later writers, Polydectes among them, treated it almost scientifically, as if trying to decode the impossible. They wrote of emanations, of invisible forces streaming from the Gorgon's eyes, altering matter at a distance. In their vision, petrification belonged not to magic, but to nature's hidden laws. The gaze became an extreme form of seeing, a fatal overexposure to the truth. Through it, the ancients explored ideas of deception itself, how the act of looking might change both the seer and the seen. Hellenistic thinkers refined this curiosity. They classified the Gorgon's power, studying its effects on life and object alike. Living things, they said, became flawless sculptures frozen mid-motion, perfect yet lifeless, while inanimate matter, untouched by soul, remained unchanged. Such selectivity suggested a precision that transcended physical law or consciousness in the act itself. Roman poets inherited this fascination. Ovid and Lucan described the process with chilling intimacy. It began, they wrote, at the Aegis fingers, toes a creeping stillness rising through the body. The victim could still feel, still think, even as the stone climbed higher, sealing limbs, chest, breath until, at last, the heart and mind solidified together. Death by awareness. Silence by knowledge. The Roman imagination lingered on detail, the texture of hair preserved, the folds of cloth, the last expression caught in marble. They saw in this precision a divine craftsmanship, a perfection that terrified because it was so exact. To them, the Gorgon's gaze was not decay, it was preservation. A suspension of life, a permanence beyond corruption. The flesh did not rot, it endured. Philosophers soon found metaphor in this mystery. The deadly gaze became symbol of knowledge too great, of revelation that overwhelms. Pre-Socratic thinkers used it to illustrate the danger of confronting truth directly, of looking into what no mind can contain. To perceive ultimate reality, they warned, was to lose one's humanity, to be stilled by comprehension itself. Pythagorean mystics took this further. They saw the gaze as the final degree of sight and divine reciprocity between observer and observed. All seeing, they said, was a small exchange of essence. In the Gorgon, that exchange became absolute, the seer absorbed, erased, completed. Later, Platonic interpreters linked this to the ascent of the soul. The petrifying power mirrored the fate of one who beheld the forms too soon, a mind unready for truth, frozen in contemplation, unable to return. Thus the Gorgon's stare turned from horror to allegory, an emblem of the peril of pure understanding. Mystery cults across the Mediterranean embraced this dual meaning. In Dionysian rites, masks of the Gorgon represented the moment of annihilation before spiritual rebirth. To face the mask was to face the divine, to die to self, to awaken to something greater. In Orphic texts, the stare was divine judgment, a purification through stillness. The soul, halted in stone, was cleansed, prepared for another form, another life. Death as transition, not end. Egyptian traditions, woven into Hellenistic faiths, gave the Gorgon yet another aspect, the eye of wisdom, destroyer of the unworthy, illuminer of the initiated. To some, her gaze was annihilation, to others, ascension. Across temples and households, artists and priests invoked her image on amulets, vases, shields. The power was diluted, tamed, protective, not lethal. A fragment of the divine weapon turned to human use. This was the paradox the ancients revered, that what kills might also guard, that terror and safety could share the same face. And so Medusa became beauty and dread intertwined, her charm fatal, her horror sacred. Artists struggled to capture her, to balance allure with danger. Archaic sculptors emphasized the monster bulging eyes, fangs, tongues, a face that warned, not invited. The image served one function, to repel. But by the classical age, the lines softened. Medusa grew almost human, a tragic divinity, beautiful and cursed. Painters and sculptors saw equilibrium between grace and terror, between goddess and victim. Hellenistic masters took the paradox still further. Their Medusa was irresistible and fatal, a symbol of pity and fear entwined. Her face, calm, sorrowful, deadly, captured the eternal question, can beauty itself destroy? Sculptors of the late Hellenistic age portrayed Medusa not as a beast, but as tragedy made flesh. Her features followed the classical ideals of beauty, perfect symmetry, calm poise, yet something in the eyes betrayed pain. Around her, the serpents writhed softly, alive with suggestion, both ornament and warning. These visions of Medusa reflected a shift in art and thought an age no longer content with fear alone. Artists searched for emotion, for contradiction, for the humanity hidden within the monstrous. Hellenistic writers too spoke of inner torment, of sorrow and wisdom trapped in a cursed face. Roman artists refined this balance to perfection. Their mosaics and marble reliefs rendered her with flawless beauty, a goddess who could have graced Olympus, if not for the faint movement in her hair, the subtle tension beneath the serenity. At a glance, she was divine; on second look, terrifying. It was art as paradox, attraction, and repulsion bound together. The Romans mastered that duality, classical proportion concealing supernatural dread. Her serpents, delicate and decorative from afar, betrayed their nature only in close study. The viewer was drawn in and then recoiled. The challenge of depicting Medusa was more than a problem of form, it was a problem of philosophy. How could one body hold opposites, beauty and terror, grace and destruction, without one diminishing the other? In seeking that answer, ancient artists explored the limits of divine complexity itself. Writers followed the sculptor's lead. They used Medusa's paradox to probe desire, danger, morality, the way allure could mask peril, and how outward beauty could conceal inner power. Tragic poets described her as once radiant, now monstrous, a mirror of injustice, a figure both feared and pitied. Through centuries, the evolution of her image mirrored changing ideals of womanhood and divinity. In archaic times, she was pure apotropaic function, a warning, not a woman. By the classical and Hellenistic ages, she became psychological, an emblem of complexity, a study in the dual nature of the divine. Comparative mythology extended her reach. Across the Mediterranean, cultures shared her symbols: eyes that killed, gazes that judged, faces that blended human and beast. In Egypt, the lion-headed Sekhmet could annihilate with a glance. Her burning eyes brought plague to those who defied cosmic law, her fury both punishment and purification. She was judgment embodied, a soul aflame that mirrored the Greek idea of divine wrath. Set, too, possessed a deadly gaze, eyes that blighted crops, that spread sickness to enemies of order. His chaos echoed the Greek titan's forces of the untamed, the dangerous energy beyond civilization's walls. From east to west, vision itself became divine instrument. To see was to act, to look was to wield power. In Mesopotamia, the demon Namashtu brought death through her stare, a hybrid creature of woman and beast whose glance could strike mothers and children. Her very image blurred boundaries, protecting by terror, mirroring the Gorgon's duality. Talismanic plaques bearing her face were carved to deflect her influence, protection, born from imitation of fear. Anatolia offered its own echoes: Hittite gods, whose eyes flung lightning, spirits whose gaze alone enforced divine law. Here, too, myth made sight sacred, a bridge between human frailty and cosmic will. Through trade and cultural exchange, these visions mingled with Greek religion, shaping the theology of the Gorgon. In Phoenician and Canaanite lands, guardians with animal features and glaring eyes watched over homes and temples. Archaeologists find their faces still half human, half bestial, warding amulets and temple stones etched with the same protective stare that Greece would later call Gorgonean. Across the Mediterranean world, one idea endured: that vision itself could both protect and destroy, that the act of seeing carried danger. This shared mythology spoke to human fear, the dread of being seen, of being known by forces beyond comprehension. AIs became thresholds, the place where mortality met divinity, and from that same fear, a new story began. The chain of events leading to Perseus's impossible quest started not with gods, but with a king, Polydectes, of Seriphos. Ambitious, clever, and cruel, he ruled a small island kingdom and desired a woman who wanted nothing from him. Danae, mother of Perseus, beloved of Zeus, had come to Seriphos cast adrift, set upon the sea by her own father, Acrisius. Rescued by Dictys, a humble fisherman and brother to the king, she lived modestly, quietly, a life that infuriated Polydectes. His advances met only refusal. Her devotion to Zeus, her gratitude to Dictys, and her son's constant protection made her untouchable. Perseus had grown into strength, a young warrior whose courage made even kings wary. Polydectes could not force, could not threaten, so he schemed. He proclaimed a royal wedding, a marriage to Hippodamia, daughter of King Anonymous of Pisa. Every noble was commanded to bring a gift. Horses, he declared, were fitting tribute. Perseus owned no horses, no wealth. The decree was trap and mockery at once. Publicly shamed, he swore reckless, proud that he could fetch any prize the king desired, even the head of Medusa herself. It was a boast spoken at feast and wine, but Polydectes seized it like prophecy. Before witnesses, he bound Perseus by oath, "Fulfill your word, or live forever in disgrace." The plan was perfect. Either the boy would die in the impossible attempt, or return triumphant, bringing a weapon of fear for the king to wield. Whatever the outcome, Polydectes would win. It was ambition wrapped in ritual, a political move disguised as myth. But destiny had other designs. When Perseus faltered, when despair took him, a new light appeared Athena herself. She came radiant and stern, her grey eyes burning with power, her golden Aegis gleaming with the image of the very monster he must face. To the mortal she offered a gift, a shield of polished bronze, its surface shining like a divine mirror. Forged by Hephaestus, it reflected all things with flawless clarity, impervious to harm, unbreakable by mortal hand. Through it, Perseus would see the Gorgon but never meet her gaze. Athena explained the purpose of the shield. Its mirror would let Perseus see without seeing, to behold Medusa's reflection and live. No mortal could meet her eyes and survive. This device offered the only path to victory. Yet the weapon was more than defense. To fight by reflection meant unlearning instinct to move opposite to what one saw, to strike through inversion. Athena drilled him endlessly, teaching rhythm, distance, and the strange dance of reversed motion and mirrored truth. Then came Hermes. Where Athena brought reason, he brought agility, lightness, wit, and motion. He appeared with the calm ease of a traveler between worlds, the guide of souls who passed from life to death and back again. For Perseus, he would be that bridge between mortal ground and divine sky. First, Hermes gave him the winged sandals, the talaria, golden, feathered, responsive to thought. With them, Perseus could soar, gliding over mountain and sea, beyond the reach of monsters or men. They moved with his will, swift as the mind itself, allowing flight and maneuver in any direction. Next came the sickle, the adamantine blade once wielded by Cronus to wound his father, Uranus. Forged from unbreakable adamant, sharper than diamond, its curve was perfect for the fatal stroke that would sever the Gorgon's head. It was a weapon born from rebellion, ancient as divine conflict itself. To hold it was to wield the history of creation. The final gift was the helm of Hades, the cap of invisibility, forged by the Cyclopes during the war of gods and titans. It did not simply hide form, it erased presence, bending light and thought alike. To gods and mortals both, the wearer ceased to exist. Armed with these relics, Perseus faced not only monsters but the terror of perception itself. He trained his senses to obey reason, not fear, to act without sight, to strike without revealing. Flight, invisibility, mirrored vision each required discipline of mind beyond human measure. When the time came, his first task was to find the Grey sisters, ancient daughters of Phorcys and Ceto, keepers of knowledge and kin to the Gorgons. They alone knew where Medusa slept. He found them at the edge of the world, where twilight never lifted a realm between night and day. They were born old, their hair silver from birth, their faces creased with endless time. They shared between them a single eye and a single tooth, passing them hand to hand, moment to moment. Each glimpse of sight was borrowed, each bite of sustenance shared. Their names were Panfredo, Enyo, and Dano, alarm, horror, and dread, embodiments of fear itself. They saw beyond distance and years, their one eye turning through ages and space. But with that gift came weakness. When the eye changed hands, they were blind together. Perseus waited for that moment. Hidden by the helm of Hades, he watched as Panfredo passed the eye to Enyo. Between them, it hung for an instant, gleaming, suspended. Then his hand closed upon it. Blindness fell upon them all. Their shrieks echoed across the stone's rage, pleading, terror. Invisible, Perseus spoke. He demanded truth, the path to the Gorgon's lair, the layout of their dwelling, the moments when they slept. They hesitated. Though kin to the Gorgons, they knew fate could not be denied. Medusa's mortality had already set her apart. Her death was inevitable, and in aiding Perseus, they served a larger order of balance. So they spoke. They told him of an island of stone ringed by deadly tides, its shores littered with statues, men, beasts, and ships, all claimed by the Gorgon's gaze. They described her sisters, immortal sentinels, their bronze wings beating like thunder in the air. Only at midday, they said, when the sun stood highest and Medusa slept in her cavern's shadow, could the approach be made unseen. Armed with their wisdom, Perseus returned the eye. The grey sisters fell silent, their sight restored, their duty done. Then, soaring on Hermes' sandals, Perseus crossed the grey waters, his reflection flickering in Athena's shield. He skimmed the sea, low enough to evade the wind's cry, high enough to glimpse the island below. The landscape appeared barren, ash-colored, motionless. Figures too perfect, too still covered the ground. Warriors frozen mid-charge, sailors forever at their oars, faces locked in terror, arms raised in vain defense. Even ships stood petrified in harbor, their sails rigid, their crews turned to stone. Everywhere, silence. Everywhere, memory of failure. At the island's heart rose a rocky plateau, its ridges forming a natural amphitheater. There, the Gorgons dwelled their nests arranged for watchfulness, each sister guarding the other. Stheno and Euryale patrolled the edges, their metallic wings hissing in the wind, their movement a constant warning. But the sun was high. The moment had come. Medusa slept. From his vantage above, invisible beneath the helm, Perseus watched through the mirror's glow. He steadied his breath, feeling the pulse of gods in his hands, the sandals humming, the sickle gleaming, the shield reflecting her sleeping face. The silence deepened. One heartbeat, and he descended. Through the mirrored surface of Athena's shield, Perseus finally beheld his quarry. Even in sleep, Medusa's beauty unsettled the mind, a fusion of divinity and dread. Her face still held the symmetry of legend, but the crown of serpents betrayed her curse, a living halo that shifted and breathed. Some snakes lay coiled in rest, others swayed softly, their scales shimmering in the sun, casting hypnotic ripples of color across her form. The sight demanded iron composure. One moment of fascination could mean death. Her bronze hands rested on her chest, engraved with symbols that changed as the light moved. The fingers ended in talons, capable of rending marble as if it were flesh. Even motionless, she radiated danger, a force asleep, but never powerless. Winds of gold folded beneath her body. Each metallic feather sang quietly in the wind, a lullaby of warning. Their geometric patterns shimmered, half sacred, half threatening. To look upon her, even indirectly, was to feel the weight of creation's raw edge. Perseus descended slowly, his flight silent, invisible, a phantom drifting between stone ghosts. Every frozen figure told a story. Men who had charged, men who had fled, all locked forever in the instant of realization. The air seemed thick with the memory of fear. He balanced the gifts of three gods, the sandals, the helm, the shield, each demanding its own awareness. One super-focus could betray him. Through reflection he navigated, learning to read the reversed world, to move opposite his instincts. It was no longer a battle of strength, it was a test of mind. Hovering above her, he steadied the sickle. Light glanced from its curve, a brief, betraying flash. He froze, then struck. The motion was seamless, one arc, one breath, and the blade met flesh and bronze. The head fell soundlessly, the body convulsed once, then stillness. No cry, only the rush of air. In that instant, the world changed. From the blood that touched the earth, two beings burst forth, not curses, but revelations. First came Pegasus' wings unfurled in brilliance, feathers flashing silver-white. He rose in flight immediately, born not of death but of freedom. The wind bent around him, and the still statues stirred in his wake. Then came Chrysaor, a giant warrior of gold, his sword blazing with inner fire. He stood fully formed, his armor fused to his skin, his face radiant and terrible. The ground trembled beneath him. The noise carried across the island, and the other Gorgons woke. From grief and fury, Stheno and Euryale screamed. Their cries broke the air, their bronze wings beating storms into motion. Perseus had no time. He thrust Medusa's head into Athena's enchanted pouch, sealing its gaze, but keeping its power alive. The island erupted in chaos, light, wind, thunder, grief. Perseus fled skyward, pursued by immortals who could not tire. The chase tore through clouds and over seas, their wails echoing for miles. Invisible beneath the helm, he darted between the winds, guided by Athena's unseen hand. Each beat of Hermes' sandals carried him farther from vengeance, closer to destiny. The Gorgon sisters hunted by sense, not sight, following divine scent, tracing the shimmer of god-forged metal. They cried her name, their voices shaking the horizon. Even the sea answered with waves of mourning. Perseus raced across realms. Creatures rose from ocean depths to watch sea beasts, wind spirits, and ancient gods of air and tide. His flight altered the weather itself, currents broke, storms gathered, myths wrote themselves upon the sky. When his strength began to fade, Athena whispered, directing him towards sacred ground. He landed in holy groves, where the gods forbade pursuit. There the winds fell silent, and the sound of wings receded. In those sanctuaries he rested, the severed head sealed beside him the proof of triumph and the seed of new terror. His victory was not merely over a monster, it was a triumph of reason over chaos, of reflection over blind force. Perseus had learned what mortals rarely could, that to conquer darkness, one must see it indirectly. Medusa's death became symbol, not slaughter, the turning of chthonic power into Olympian order. Her gaze, once curse, became shield. Her head, once terror, became protection. And from her destruction, civilization drew strength, the knowledge that wisdom, guided by the gods, could master even the forces that first gave birth to fear. Perseus did not triumph by matching terror with terror. He conquered through thought, through strategy, through the calm mind of one who knows when to look away. Cleverness, not brute strength, shaped his path. Each divine gift he wielded was not a replacement for human skill, but an extension of it, intelligence made visible. This was the essence of Greek heroism, preparation over pride, reflection over rage. Medusa's head became the proof, a weapon transformed into a guardian, a curse turned into protection. From her death emerged not destruction, but civilization's safeguard. Across the Mediterranean, the Gorgonians spread like sunlight after storm. Carved on shields, temple doors, and city gates, it became the face that frightened evil away, the terror that defended rather than devoured. Where once the Gorgon had petrified men, now her image petrified misfortune. The severed head made Perseus a legend among mortals. He carried it not as a trophy, but as balance, the meeting of mortal will and divine power. Its eyes, still alive with forbidden light, could halt any creature, mortal or god, turning threat into monument. To carry such a force required ritual precision. Athena herself wove the pouch, a dark fabric from divine realms, sealed against the deadly gleam, yet ready for instant release. Symbols of protection lined its edges, warnings to spirits and men alike. This is power harnessed, not destroyed. His first true test came in the west, beneath the endless sky of Atlas. The Titan, doomed to bear the heavens, had long awaited prophecy that a son of Zeus would bring his ruin. When Perseus approached, weary and seeking rest, Atlas refused him. Rocks fell from his hands like thunder. The mountain trembled. Perseus, cornered and calm, drew the head from its shroud. A single glance, and eternity changed shape. Atlas stiffened, his voice turning to echo, his limbs to ridges, his hair to snow. The heavens remained on his shoulders, but his name became the mountains. Even now, their strange minerals gleam under the sun, as though some trace of divine light still pulses beneath the stone. From there, Perseus flew east, his wings carrying him to the shores of Ethiopia. There, he saw Andromeda, a princess chained to the rocks, the sea boiling before her, a monster rising from the depths. The creature Cetus was Poseidon's fury given form, part dragon, part whale, its body longer than a ship's fleet, its scales flashing like armor. It moved with purpose, with mind. The story was cruelly familiar: a mother's pride, a god's wrath, and a daughter's sacrifice. Cassiopeia had claimed her beauty rivaled the Nereids. Poseidon answered with the sea's revenge. Only Andromeda's blood could quiet the storm. From above, Perseus saw both terror and innocence. He descended swift, unseen. The monster lunged. Waves rose like walls. Using Hermes' sandals, he danced through the air, harrying the beast, cutting at the soft places of its neck and eyes, until it turned upward roaring. That was the moment. The head was unveiled. Cetus froze mid-strike, a titan of the sea, its scales turning to stone, its open jaws becoming a cliff. The waters calmed, and the coast gained a new monument, a petrified guardian watching the horizon. Andromeda lived. Gratitude turned to love, love to marriage. But the story of heroes is never free of politics. Andromeda had already been promised to her uncle, Phineus, whose envy burned hotter than any god's anger. He came armed and furious, filling the hall of celebration with his soldiers. Steel clashed, voices rose. Outnumbered 100-1, Perseus held his ground. Then, once more, reflection became weapon. He drew the head, but not recklessly. He turned his gaze aside, angled it with mirrors, used Athena's teachings to direct death as if it were light. In seconds, chaos became sculpture. 200 men caught mid-swing, mid-shout, mid-flight, transformed into a gallery of defiance. The stone faces still screamed. Only Phineus remained, fighting reflection with reflection. Perseus countered with brilliance, a polished shield, a ricochet of death. Phineus saw himself in the mirrored eyes of the Gorgon and saw no more. Thus ended the last threat to his union. But peace never lasts in myth. As Perseus journeyed homeward, bandits and pirates sought to test his legend and found themselves immortalized in stone. Mountains, reefs, and statues across the sea became his unintentional monuments. Some said the blood that dripped from the Gorgon's head fell upon the sands of Libya, and from each drop a serpent was born. Others said storms followed his shadow, for even tamed power leaves echoes. In Egypt, priests saw his story differently. To them, the head was the sun, its gaze the light that turned chaos to order. Pharaohs reenacted his flight in temples, proclaiming their own rule as reflection of his. Stone walls bore his likeness beside Ra and Horus, the hero who turned fear into faith. And thus the myth spread a story of balance, of transformation, of mortal thought guiding divine might. The legend of Perseus spread like the ripples of trade itself. Across the harbors of Tyre and Sidon, Phoenician sailors carried his tale, the clever mortal who tamed divine terror. Each culture shaped the myth to mirror its own soul. Some praised his intellect, others his reverence toward the gods, and merchants told of the Gorgon's head as the perfect symbol, the warning against hubris, the emblem of protection earned through piety and order. But all stories led back to one place, Seriphos, the island where it began. King Polydectes awaited Perseus's return, expecting failure, expecting ridicule, and still plotting against Danae. His arrogance had only grown. The queen sought refuge within Zeus's temple, and the king's soldiers violated even that sacred ground. This was no longer myth, it was blasphemy. Perseus entered the throne hall quietly, his eyes calm, the divine bag heavy at his side. The court laughed, mocking the boy who had dared challenge gods. But when he loosened the clasp, when the first gleam of serpentine hair met the torchlight, silence fell. And then stone. In a heartbeat, laughter became stillness. Every sneer, every jeer, preserved forever. Polydectes stood frozen mid-gasp, a monument to disbelief turned to truth. The marble faces of his court watched him for eternity, the price of mocking destiny. Perseus had no need to claim power, his act alone dissolved the old tyranny. Seriphos was free, and his mother's honor restored. Yet the myth did not end with vengeance. It deepened, evolving into philosophy, theology, and art. The head of Medusa was not buried, nor destroyed. Its power was too great and too dangerous to remain in mortal hands. The Greeks believed that such forces, once unleashed, must be ritually contained, transformed through divine stewardship. The Gorgon's face became a mirror of protection, its stare not of malice, but of boundary. It guarded temples, ships, hoes not to petrify, but to warn. To look upon it was to remember. Order must always master chaos. Athena herself received the head in solemn ceremony. Perseus arrived with Danae and Andromeda, his mission fulfilled, his burden ready for surrender. Athena examined the relic, its eyes still glowing faintly, the serpent still whispering, alive even in death. Then she smiled, for she saw not horror, but potential. Hephaestus forged the mount. The head was set upon the Aegis, its power woven into the bronze, its gaze refracted, controlled. The shield became a paradox, a source of terror that protected life. From that moment, Athena's image changed forever. No longer merely the goddess of wisdom and war, she became the custodian of balance, the one who could look into chaos without succumbing to it. When Athens later went to war, she appeared above the battlefield, the Aegis upon her chest. The Gorgon's face glimmered and armies faltered. Men laid down their spears not from wounds, but from awe. The Aegis became more than a weapon, it was divine law made visible. Every city understood, to defy justice was to face the Gorgon's gaze. Temples, coins, and armor across the Greek world bore her likeness. Artists stylized the features: wide eyes, serpents curling, a mouth neither screaming nor silent, the balance of terror and peace. Priests incorporated her image into rites of protection. Initiates learned to see beyond the surface, to recognize in the Gorgon's face the symbol of transformation, that true power lies in the ability to control one's own fear, and thus what began as horror ended as wisdom. Medusa, once the outcast and the curse, became the unseen guardian of civilization. Her story, refracted through Perseus, through Athena, through the generations that built temples in her name, taught the Greeks that the monstrous and the divine are never far apart, and that only reflection can turn one into the other Tassi. Across centuries, the Gorgon's image became a mirror through which Greek and later Roman civilization examined its own soul. The earliest depictions show pure terror. Great stone faces with bulging eyes, lolling tongues, and serpentine hair stared down from temple pediments not to please, but to warn. They marked the boundary between sacred and profane, a visual spell carved in marble: do not trespass. On the western front of the temple of Athena Aegina, a colossal Gorgonean glared at those who approached, its expression both protector and threat. Coins struck across the Aegean bore the same face, the head of Medusa, a civic emblem, circulating both wealth and warding charm. To spend such silver was to pass the protection of the goddess from hand to hand. Potters painted the Gorgon on craters and kylikes, black figure and red figure alike. On some vases, Perseus fled with the severed head; on others, only the Gorgon's eyes looked out, an eternal guardian over wine, ritual, and fire. Warriors carried her visage into battle, engraved upon shields whose gleaming bronze caught the sun like the flash of her immortal gaze. The light alone could unsettle an enemy's heart, an echo of petrification without the need for stone. In homes, amulets and jewelry bore her likeness, fashioned from gold and amber, set close to the heart. Women wore her face not as horror, but as power, a reminder that feminine divinity could both protect and punish. Thus the monstrous turned maternal, the cursed became the guardian. By the late classical age, art softened her terror. Medusa's features grew human, even beautiful. Artists sought not to repel but to reconcile, to show beauty and dread coexisting in one expression. Sculptors discovered that by shifting angle and light, the same face could charm from one side and chill from another. Viewers learned that the line between wonder and fear was as thin as the edge of Athena's blade. The Medusa Rondanini embodied this transformation, a serene face framed in serpents, the horror hidden beneath ideal symmetry. Her gaze no longer cursed, it mourned. A victim of divine cruelty, yet still a bearer of divine power. From this evolution emerged a deeper symbolism, that terror, understood, becomes wisdom, that beauty, unguarded, becomes danger. Hellenistic artists expanded this psychology. They carved Medusa with eyes that seemed aware of her fate, her isolation, her dual nature. In marble and bronze, she was no longer a monster slain, but a mind caught between divinity and damnation. Viewers no longer feared her, they pitied her. This was the new spirituality of the age, to see divinity even in the fallen. When Rome inherited Greece, it inherited her symbols as well. Roman sculptors refined the face, polished it to marble perfection. Medusa adorned armor, villas, fountains, and civic halls, a universal emblem of imperial protection. To the Romans, she represented the state itself, terrifying to enemies, benevolent to those within her gaze. Across temples, coins, mosaics, and frescoes, the Gorgon's face became a shared Mediterranean language, a sign that beauty and fear were two sides of the same coin. Her story taught that even chaos, once understood, could serve order. In every generation, the message endured that what once destroyed can be transformed, that the monstrous may guard the sacred, that knowledge, reflection, and art can turn death itself into protection. From the wild stone masks of archaic temples to the serene marble of imperial Rome, Medusa's face remained the eternal balance between terror and wisdom, reminding mortals and gods alike that every civilization stands safest when it dares to look into the mirror and not turn away. As the empire expanded, so did Medusa's reach. Roman artists of the 1st and 2nd centuries AD forged a grand synthesis: Greek myth, Egyptian symbolism, Near Eastern pattern, and Italian realism merged into one enduring language of divine protection. In marble and mosaic, in gold and fresco, her face appeared everywhere, terrifying, sacred, familiar. Across cities and provinces, the Gorgon became both ornament and omen. Ovid, in his Metamorphoses, gave her a new soul. His words turned the old legend into meditation on beauty punished, on transformation as fate. Artists listened. They carved emotion into stone, showing not only the monster, but the moment before the priestess, the betrayal, the horror dawning in her eyes. In their hands, time itself seemed to move through marble. Architects placed her face above arches and doorways, in atriums, bathhouses, and temples. Every threshold bore her warning. Beyond this line, sacred law prevails. The Gorgon became Rome's quiet sentry, a face of order in a world of shifting gods. Within wealthy villas, she watched from floor mosaics and painted walls, not as a threat, but as a charm. Her power turned inward, a guardian of household peace and prosperity. Each home's Medusa was unique, her expression softened, her eyes protective. She no longer frightened, she protected by fear itself. The empire's vast trade routes carried her image farther still north into Gaul and Britain, east to the Danube, south across Africa and the Levant. Each region remade her in its own likeness, a Celtic mask, a Phoenician amulet, a British carving. Every culture claimed a piece of her power. Thus, the Gorgon became the empire's most democratic goddess, recognized by all, belonging to none. Even as Rome faded, her gaze endured. Through mosaics, mirrors, and coins, she crossed into the Middle Ages. In Byzantium, she changed once again. Her snarl softened into majesty, her horror into judgment. God icons and imperial regalia bore her likeness, now symbolizing divine justice, the emperor's authority to repel the forces of darkness. The monster had become the law's guardian. In the Islamic East, echoes of her image lived on. Artists reimagined her as jinn, a spirit half seen in the arabesques of palaces and manuscripts. Through these veiled forms, classical memory survived the hidden current beneath new faiths. The Carolingian Renaissance revived her in ink. In monastic scriptoriums, monks copied Ovid and sketched simplified Perseus scenes in margins, the hero as Christian knight, the Gorgon as sin overcome by faith. Medusa, once a goddess of terror, became allegory, the face of temptation, the soul turned to stone by pride. In Gothic cathedrals, her spirit stared down again. Grotesques and gargoyles, their tongues extended, their eyes wide, were her descendants. They guarded church walls as she had once guarded temples. At Notre Dame, she hid among the waterspouts, repurposed, renamed, yet instantly recognizable. Even the faithful passing below felt the old power. Fear turned to safety. Illuminated manuscripts of Ovid's Metamorphoses kept her legend alive through centuries of faith. Miniatures showed Perseus's mirrored strike, Medusa's fall, and Athena's triumph painted now with Gothic grace, their meaning transformed but their beauty intact. By the Renaissance she rose once more in full daylight. Humanists, armed with rediscovered Greek and Latin texts, saw in her not sin, but complexity. Donatello's bronze Perseus restored the classical body, balanced, poised, triumphant, the human form as divine harmony. Medusa's head hung limp, a symbol not of death, but of victory through intellect. Printing spread Ovid anew, and artists across Europe found her again in his verses. She became muse, not monster. Leonardo painted her unseen, a face so real, witnesses said it breathed, combining terror and beauty until neither could be told apart. Michelangelo sketched her tragedy in living anatomy, a myth reborn through flesh and motion. Then came Caravaggio. His Medusa, painted on a shield, was both mirror and warning. Lit by candlelight, her face still bleeding, she looked not outward but at us. The viewer, not Perseus, became her final adversary. Baroque artists amplified the emotion. Rubens, dynamic and thunderous, set Perseus rescuing Andromeda against the storm of wings and waves. Bernini sculpted the myth in marble, capturing the heartbeat before silence, the breath between life and stone. By the age of neoclassicism, the legend stood reborn in reason. Canova's Perseus triumphant raised the Gorgon's head as enlightenment itself, man's intellect conquering darkness. His marble gleamed not with fear, but with clarity. In her defeat, Medusa became symbol of control, the triumph of measured beauty over chaos. Yet even then, her eyes remained open, because every age, from Athens to Rome, from Florence to Paris, has seen itself in that reflection and understood the Gorgon never dies. She only changes her face. Jacques David painted myth not as fantasy, but as mirror. His heroes stood like marble ideals, yet spoke to living politics. In his hands, Perseus, Achilles, and Leonidas became citizens of the Enlightenment, symbols of civic virtue, of reason triumphant over chaos. Myth was no longer distant legend, it was moral instruction, a language of courage, justice, and the Republic itself. Then came Romanticism, and with it, the trembling heart returned. When Neoclassicism sought order, Romanticism sought the soul. Artists turned inward, listening to what the ancients had left unsaid. Derrico sketched the horror of Medusa's death, not the hero's victory, but the cost of it. In his dark lines, one could feel the loneliness of divine punishment, the silent question, who is the real monster here? Delacroix answered in color and fire. His brush made chaos beautiful. His mythological scenes pulsed with emotion and rebellion. In his world, Medusa was no longer curse nor trophy. She was the wound itself, eternal and human. Centuries later, myth met the modern mind. Freud saw in her gaze the fear beneath desire, the ancient anxiety of men facing feminine power. The snakes, he wrote, were symbols and denials, both signs of what the male unconscious could not name. To him, petrification was not punishment. It was paralysis of the self before truth. Jung, in turn, looked deeper. He saw not fear, but shadow, the hidden self each of us must face. Perseus, he said, does not slay Medusa, he integrates her. Only by confronting the darkness within can a hero become whole. In this reading, the mirror shield becomes therapy, a tool for reflection, not destruction. Then, in the 1970s, came voices that changed the story again. Feminist thinkers, led by Helene Sixus, laughed not in mockery, but in liberation. The laugh of the Medusa reclaimed her from mythic silence. Sixus wrote that woman must write her own body, must embrace what patriarchy calls monstrous. Medusa, she said, was never dead. She was alive and laughing. Her serpents became the wild hair of freedom, her gaze the courage to be seen. From then on, artists and writers reimagined her not as victim, but as voice. Her trauma became power, her story, resistance. In paintings, poetry, and film, she rose again, eyes open, unashamed, unafraid. Archaeology, meanwhile, traced her footsteps back to the stones. At Corfu, the Temple of Artemis revealed her oldest face, massive, fierce, divine. Each discovery spoke of how deeply her image was woven into temples, armor, and prayer. The Gorgon was never mere ornament. She was covenant protection through awe. Every vessel, every wall, every coin whispered the same vow. To look upon her is to remember the gods are near. Even in mystery cults Dionysian, Orphic, her presence endured. Initiates faced her symbol in candle-lit chambers, learning that transformation begins with terror. To meet the Gorgon was to die to illusion and awaken reborn. And still she lives. In fashion, her head crowns Versace beauty weaponized, glamour edged with danger. In film and games, she shifts again, sometimes monstrous, sometimes misunderstood. In activism, she has become the face of resistance. The #MeToo era reclaimed her as emblem of survivor rage, the stare that will not turn away. What once was curse became demand for justice. In therapy too, she found new purpose. Psychologists use her myth to teach resilience, that facing the unbearable is the first step toward healing. The mirror is no longer a weapon, it's reflection. Across millennia, her story has never faded because it speaks to what never changes: power, identity, transformation. The human need to make meaning from pain. From temple stone to protest sign, from chisel to camera lens, Medusa has looked back at us, challenging, questioning, daring us to meet her gaze. She began as monster, became muse, and endures as mirror. The myth lives because we still need it to remind us that even in terror there is truth, and that the power we fear most might be our own.